With artificial intelligence and the lots of hype and hysteria around this topic, there are differences between the promise of technology and its implementation in real-world applications. Our objective with our time today is to share some of the thoughts and examples on how to drive socially inclusive artificial intelligence and how to minimize the risk of AI further widening economic, social, and political imbalances and inequalities. It is my pleasure and honor to introduce this highly distinguished panel, and I'm going to move here. With us today is Mr. Woherem, founder and chairman of Digital Africa, preparing Africa for the fourth industrial revolution, and a strong advocate for moving from being a passive consumer to an active participant in the innovation and use of digital technology. Evans was a pioneer and a chairman of the InterSwitch Nigeria, which is now one of Nigeria's unicorns. Welcome, Evans.
Thank
To
you.
my right is Ashley. Ashley Van Heteren is an associate partner with McKinsey & Company, leading their artificial intelligence for social good initiatives globally. And she's a co-author of the McKinsey Global Institute report called Applying AI for Social Good, using artificial intelligence to help the unemployed, combating the growing measles epidemic, helping victims and survivors of human trafficking and post-disaster reconstruction efforts. Followed by Mrs. Shamika Shirimane, the director of the Division on Technology and Logistics of UNCTAD. She also serves as the head of the Secretariat of the UN Commission for Science and Technology and Development. Shamika has extensive experience in development policy, research and technical cooperation gained from international organizations, national governments, think tanks and universities. The next person is John Kamara, director of the Machine Intelligence Institute of Africa and ambassador of City AI for Nairobi and Lagos. And John has vast experience in new markets and verticals across e-commerce, internet solutions, digital applications, and financial payment solutions. John is also founder of Jamboro and of AI Health. The next person to my right is Doreen Bogdan-Martin, director of the ITU's Telecommunication Development Bureau. Doreen is a strategic leader with 30 years of high-level experience in international and intergovernmental relations, focusing on policy and strategy development, analysis and execution. She's one of the principal architects of the annual Global Symposium for Regulators and is currently driving ITU's latest high-profile initiative called Equals, which is a global partnership for gender equality in the digital age. Natasha Milic-Freiling is chair of ACM, Women Europe, and chair of data science at the University of Nottingham. She has a long track record in interdisciplinary research, both in industry and academia. She collaborates with a broader community on the issues of ethics and transparency in computing design, knowledge transfer, and digital continuity. And my name is Nancy Nemesh. I am the founder of Miss AI, Artificial Intelligence for and with Women. Thank you for joining us today. First, before we even get started, I would like to have a quick understanding of who is in the room. Please raise your hands if you are a startup, if you're representing a startup company. A few, thank you. Raise your hands if you are a corporation, please. A few. Raise your hands if you're a governmental organization. A few more. Wonderful. So, in order to be relevant to everybody, let's start with an important question. And let's start with defining what is socially inclusive artificial intelligence and what is not. And I would love to have Natasha take the first question. What is socially inclusive AI, with your long-standing experience across corporate jobs as well as your own activities? Give us your opinion on that, Natasha, please. And also, why are we talking about AI and society today?
I hope you can hear me. Thank you. Thank you very much, Nancy, for inviting me to reflect on this. I have spent lots of time working in research. And as you know, in research, we're all driven by innovation and often do not have a full idea of how things are implemented later. In the value chain, as people who are in the audience and are taking the startup perspective on the issue, we know that innovation needs to go through stages. And who will get access to innovation often depends on what sort of applications are put in the marketplace. Because from research to impact on a society, normally there is this transformation of technology from what we call core technology into something called product or a service that then serves people in their everyday lives. So the inclusivity or not being inclusive all depends on what really gets translated into application space. And then, of course, on the governments, if it is about a service to the society in general, is it about transport or is it about health or education, depends on what society really decides will be the focus and emphasis and at which rate this is going to penetrate the society. It just happened I lived in different continents. I'm from former Yugoslavia and I lived in the States and last 20 years in UK. So I have seen in different cultures, different places, technology coming into different rate and touching people in different ways. So I would just say the diversity of the world is so huge. And when we talk about this inclusivity and exclusivity, we really need to contextualize things and zoom on to particular aspects. And I'll give the word to others to comment.
Yeah, and Natasha, I just have one more question because you are an inventor and you also have a number of patents. So I'm curious to know, how do you see how AI got here? How did artificial intelligence get to this point? And how come that we are talking about social good in AI today?
It is a kind of life cycle in the technology innovation. We have seen kind of buzz of this technology 20 years back. It's very interesting if you look at the literature. Whenever something becomes sort of a bigger issue for the society, you can look at the traces of it in the back where the technology tries to take off. There have been a number of aspects where, say, deep neural networks have tried to take off, and now it's taking off because of the fusion of a number of factors: availability of the data, availability of the infrastructure, availability of the devices and access and people practices. So they all came together now and is given the platform at which this new way of doing things will take off. And now the question that we are trying to figure out here is, how is that going to evolve? There will be concerns and there will be enthusiasm about it, and in this kind of flurry of issues, we will find a way. I'm very optimistic about this, but I also agree that we need to pay very good attention to how that's done so that good actually prevails.
That's a great headway for maybe going along these lines and asking Evans, why is AI for social good so important? If we listen to what Natasha just said, what is your opinion, and coming also representing a very important continent, Africa, why is AI for social good important?
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers of this event for making it possible for us all to be here today. To me, as somebody that got involved in AI in the 80s, first as a student and then eventually as a researcher, I think AI has come a very long way. It started with a lot of promise, and then eventually, most of what were being promised were not really, happening across the board. Much of what was happening was some expert systems here and there, and as a result of that, I thought a lot of people started feeling that perhaps AI is not going to deliver much of what was being promised. And then eventually we started seeing that AI, in fact, became an embedded technology in almost all functional, systems you were, looking at. So as a result of that, some of us resigned ourselves to the fact that AI probably is just going to be an embedded technology. But lo and behold, in the world we are living in today, AI has become so pervasive and so important. It is now something that is regarded as the new electricity. If something is regarded as the new electricity, then it means that it's going to pervade, everything we are doing. If something is that important, that is going to touch on almost everything we are doing, then it means that we have to also be very careful in how we bring on board, that. We have to make sure that it is socially inclusive. Because something that is so powerful, it can be for ill and it can also be for good. Just like most other technologies that we have witnessed in the world we are living in. If that is the case, then it means that we have to be very careful. We have to make sure that AI systems actually are designed, developed, implemented, and regulated in such a manner that it is for good rather than for ill. So that, to me, is the reason why it is very important for us to also look upon as, AI as something that needs to be socially inclusive. That then means that we need to make sure that there are ethical laws, rules, and regulations and certifications that need to be in the area of IT, so that people just don't run away and do whatever they like. But apart from that, we need to also make sure that AI systems follow a developmental path that makes sure that certain things are considered. In systems development, in those days, mainly functional requirements were looked at. Then eventually some of us started also preaching that organizational and social requirements should also be looked at. Today, it appears, especially with AI, we need to also make sure that ethical and humane considerations also have to be looked at, so that when we put across our requirements specification, it includes all that. Then it means that the design will be such that it includes both technical, socio-organizational, and even human type, requirements. Then it is, we make sure that the data types that are fed into the system is such that it also takes into consideration, what we are talking about inclusiveness, and that it's not, biased. And then the system eventually is developed, and we should also make sure that it is, always looked at to make sure that it is not yielding results that are unwanted. Thank you.
And you brought a really important point. You said regulation. Who should, in your opinion, regulate this space?
Well, to me, we have the United Nations. The United Nations has helped us to regulate so many other technologies, in the past. That, being the case, in terms of making sure that we come up with codes of how technology should be developed, to be designed, I think United Nations should be involved. Somebody like Isaac Asimov, came, sometime in the past and gave us, 3 codes that have to be observed each time we develop AI system. One of which is that at no time should an AI system harm a human being. Yeah? I think those three, codes are probably not enough. So people should sit down, look at them, and rework them in such a manner that they can be very useful in the world we are living in, today. It could be championed by the United Nations, but having said that, it should also be, regulated at the continental, at the country, and even at the organizational levels. Thank you.
Indeed, indeed. Now, let's switch gears a little bit. Doreen is here, and one of the key areas that you also work on is the AI capabilities as well. Can you please give us, Doreen, some of the examples? What are the types of AI capabilities, as well as the bottlenecks that you see happening, and how we can mitigate risk in that space?
Sure, thank you so much, Nancy, and good afternoon, everyone. You did my intro in the beginning, but I just wanted to mention this is my first time at the AI Summit in my new capacity as Director of Development. I was previously the head of ITU Strategy Department. And the reason that I mention that is because for the first time in ITU history, in 154 years, a woman was elected. And I don't say that in a bragging way. I say that because it's really important to pay attention to the lack of diversity in AI. And the fact that it took ITU 154 years, and I'm one of 5, means that we have lots to do. And when it comes to this session, I also wanted to mention, this is the first time that we're really putting inclusion on the center stage at the AI for Good Summit. And we will not have AI for good if we don't think about it in an inclusive way. I wanted to respond to your question looking at sort of the good news and the bad news. I think on the good news side, AI is still in its infancy. So we're sort of at an inflection point. I think we heard that from some of the speakers this morning. So we have the opportunity to reflect on how we want to shape the future of AI and the frameworks that are necessary to take us there, and the leadership that is needed as well. That's something that some of our speakers brought up this morning. I also think it's important to remember that technology is not an end in itself. There's the good and the bad. On the good side, there is potential for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, those 17 SDGs, but there's also challenges, as you mentioned, challenges. AI is disruptive, so there will be impacts on the job market. Some jobs will be eliminated. There are ethical issues. We heard that this morning as well. Human rights issues as well. And coming to the diversity issue and gender bias, there are risks that we can actually perpetuate the barriers that we see today to equality, and those are barriers that we want to eradicate, but we can actually end up perpetuating those barriers, which is kind of scary. The chief of IBM, and again, this comes to your point about the challenges, she actually referred, in talking about AI, to sort of the random acts of digital. And what she meant was that there's such fragmentation, right? And that's a big problem, especially when we look at it, well, we look at it from the UN side, but also when we look at it from government policymakers, government regulators. You asked the question before about regulation. And to overcome these challenges, we need to really have a whole of government approach, and something that we've been doing at the ITU, working together with the UN Foundation and the Digital Impact Alliance, is this SDG investment framework, where we're really pushing governments to come together and try to have a whole of government approach when they think about technologies and AI to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And it is really important that we break down those barriers. Otherwise, we will impact society and it will limit us from, achieving the good that we can. I mentioned the diversity challenges. I think we see them today when we look at things like the personal assistants. That's something that came up this morning. A lot of those digital assistants are female, from Alexa to Siri to Cortana and others. We need more inclusivity in voice recognition technology. And we need our tech companies to really keep this in mind when they're developing tech. And of course, the tech companies have a big challenge because they don't have a huge pool of women to tap into. And in the beginning, you mentioned equals. That's something that we're doing together with some 90 academic institutions, the private sector, governments, regulators, and the UN, to push to try to close the digital gender gap, to push to try to help women and girls get the necessary digital skills, and finally to push to get them interested in the tech sector. At the end of the day, we can't overcome the diversity issue and the problems around bias, and maybe I'll come back to that later, unless we actually have diversity in those that are creating AI applications.
I'm so curious to just take you up on that. Could you give an example, or maybe two? How do you drive that diversity? We know that talent is limited right now. We know that girls are starting in STEM, but then pretty quickly develop other interests. What would be some of the key things that the society, the companies, and we as humans, as well as the startups, can do to drive that diversity?
Yeah. Well, I think everybody has a role to play. I think every stakeholder can do something. And the first thing that they can do is bring awareness to the issue. I think that young girls, middle school, high school, university, and beyond need to understand that this is a field where there are jobs. There's lots of vacant jobs because we simply don't have enough expertise and enough talent to fill these jobs. And that these jobs can be rewarding. They can make an impact on some of the greatest development challenges that we face. So bringing awareness to the issue, having educators understand why they should encourage girls to take computer science classes, making sure that the parents are in the loop, and sort of the whole ecosystem needs to be there, government leaders as well. We do Girls in ICT Day on the fourth Thursday of the fourth month. That's a small contribution to bringing awareness to the issue. And I think we see that bringing awareness and rewarding those that are making progress. We have our Equals in Tech award series that we do every year. I think that's also important to highlight best practices and showcase what can be done, and then hopefully those practices can then be scaled.
Yeah, and you are, of course, great role models, as well as people in this room who are interested in this topic. So we can just call for you all to stand up and really show what you work on, and really show what are the key projects that you're driving in artificial intelligence, so that others can get inspiration, just like from this amazing panel, which is very diverse and really represents the thinking that should happen across the society. Thank you, Doreen. Now, Shamika, as we are looking at some of the issues as well, right? Because we were talking about trying to narrow onto what AI for social good is, and we know it can't only be for social good. Could you talk a little bit about the current issues that you are happening, constraining the AI application for social good, and how do you think that could be mitigated, be it a shortage of talent or data science or big data? What do you think should be the focus there?
Thank you, Nancy. I am an economist, so I'm not an expert on technology. So let me bring the economics of AI and the frontier technologies. What we see is that what is different this time is that this amazing and the superior ability to predict systems of behavior. And what we see also is that this can be done at scale and at increasingly cost going down, so at very low cost. And what we also see is that increasingly these technologies can be accessed by many, especially the applications, not the development of the technology. That's a different story. But once all these come together, the ability to predict the scale, at low cost, and the accessibility become easier, I mean, the world opens up in a big way. And there are enormous opportunities to achieve SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, in this new environment. Now, let's take the example of food security. This is the goal 2. This is one of the biggest goals of the sustainable development. And look at the weather systems predictions and what we can do with these new technologies, AI and machine learning and big data on the early warning systems, the soil conditions. This provides enormous opportunity for farmers, especially farmers in poor countries. And take the example of health. That's the SDG. That's the goal 3. And look at what these technologies can do for predictions of disease outbreaks. I think some of you mentioned this. And to AI enable, the individualized medicines, and the world opens up. It's the same for financial inclusion. And we have seen what these technologies can do for financial inclusion. So then the question is, yes, there are amazing opportunities and amazing opportunities for poor people in developing countries. But why are these technologies going there? So that's the big question. So this is where I come to answer you. I think I would like to say, this is a bit probably politically incorrect among yourselves, but I would like to say that there is a failure in imagination, a failure of imagination. There are the AI developers out there, and there are the people who can benefit from these technologies on the ground, and there's a big gap between these two groups. And that's what we need to see more. How the developers of AI technologies, not just studying my buying habits and what am I doing on the internet, which advertisement I'm clicking, why don't they do more to understand the realities on the ground and knowing that with this superior ability to predict with the scale at which these technologies go forward and increasingly low cost of developing these applications, why can developers and those who are in need come together? Right. So this is, I would like to put to you as a challenge. Thank you.
Very good. Yeah, thank you, Shamika. Now, let's switch gears a bit into more of the practicalities, because some people here also are startup and entrepreneurs. And I'd like to ask John to give us a few examples of real-life applications that you're working on in Africa. And please also go into some of the social good aspects. What do you see in your work? What happens in Africa right now in artificial intelligence?
Thank you very much for being here. I think it's also important that we have people like, talked about having women, but also we have people who deal with real life situations every day when you have events like this. So I'm quite happy that I'm brought here to talk. In Africa, I mean, there's two problems, as I was explaining to a couple of people earlier on. The first problem is that data doesn't exist, okay? And AI is driven by data. So you can build the best machines in the world, you can build the best software solution systems, but if there's no data, then literally you can't do anything. And secondly, the way data exists is not connected, so it's very difficult, it's fragmented, and institutions are very fragmented as well. Then poverty exists. It's consistently a part of the ecosystem. So even for startups, for entrepreneurs, it's a real problem that you have to deal with. And so if you look at all these things, then you think about, as a startup or as an entrepreneur, and you look at AI first from an education perspective, can I begin to train people who work for me to understand better, what we need to do to be able to get our customers to actually use our solutions and our product? That's the first problem we face. So how are we able to incentivize people to say, you know what, this is AI, this is great for you, but can you do this for us? And I will pay you money to do it. And the first thing that you hear about when people say that, because you're dealing with 80% of an economy of people who are extremely still very poor. If you go to small villages, little places. So we do stuff in health, financial services, e-commerce, and at the minute, life sciences. And in the health space, for example, one of the biggest problems that we found is health records in Africa. So there's no health records. People are dying. The first 30 minutes of death is because somebody's misdiagnosed. Okay? And we have a lot of our African governments who are spending billions of dollars trying to build these central health record systems that will never work. point will never work because the infrastructure doesn't exist. So we say, okay, how do we deal with this problem from a consumer perspective? So can we build solutions, AI-led, that allows the consumer to take responsibility for their own health? And the problem with that is obviously we're collecting unstructured data, but that's okay. Because, a lot of the people we're dealing with are not very structured people anyway. So we collect unstructured data, and we use the AI to provide intelligence based around a lot of keyword maps, a lot of other things that we do to turn that into structured data that the medical people can read. So for us, what we're saying is we're solving a very basic problem, that once we understand the health data of a lady in a village with her kids, and we understand what she does, and she knows how to use that, we can then use the AI to begin to predict, to begin to find solutions, to talk to big donor agencies, to say, okay, half of the wastage money you're spending, you should actually do this with it.
So where are you in the process right now? Can you understand? What's the timeline? When do you think that
we've just done our first test, and what we've seen was like a lot of the people, when we even provided them with a basic schema data, to say, okay, you can just enter your data, you can see that when you log onto the system, and you can tell the system what your blood type is, and it will always be there. So if you have an accident, somebody who you trust can access the system and actually tell them what your blood type is, so they can actually give you the right blood. And that alone, even my mother doesn't know her blood type. And she's 77, so she goes to a hospital, somebody has to tell them what her blood type is. And a lot of people so we're at a position where we can then work with a lot of different agencies, work with organizations, work with government to say, once we fix this baseline problem, as little as we can, then we can use AI, machine learning, deep learning science to begin to interrogate the data a little bit better, begin to help that individual say, you know what, maybe you can't talk to a hospital, but we can give you wellness tips. Maybe a big doctor in America can actually interrogate your data while you're seated in your village and see how they can help you and direct you to another local doctor, and we can bridge the gap of efficiency and waste, and also the fact that we don't have enough medical doctors in Africa.
What's the talent situation in Africa? How do you solve that issue, which we have globally, basically?
So the big problem is talent. So that's why the Machine Learning Intelligence Institute of Africa, is also what we're trying to do is bridge the gap of education at the institute. Basically, how can we connect with universities, secondary schools, even primary schools, to begin to provide AI-based education from the universities that are very AI savvy, and use that as a way to begin to provide some baseline knowledge. And then also in the developer community, we have over 500 hubs in Africa who get grant monies, who get all this money, but a lot of them still, the basic technology they need to be able to build AI-driven platforms that make sense don't exist. So what we're also preaching is collaboration. Can we partner you guys together? Can you collaborate? Can MIA provide you with the resources that you need to be able to understand where you find the information? Can we bridge the gap between the UN and you guys so that there can be proper teachers? Can we use technology to actually teach you technology? And those are the things that we're doing, as the Machine Intelligence Institute, to be able to provide, as a non-profit, provide opportunities for people using education.
Indeed, indeed. Now, as we are looking into AI for social good, Ashley, the definition of AI in general is a moving target. There are so many definitions, even the experts are not always on the same page what AI is. With your work that you do, can you tell us how do you identify good AI versus not so good AI, and where do you see good AI going in the next years?
Well, I don't think that there's necessarily a good versus bad AI. I think it's around what is the impact that you're trying to accomplish. And so if you think about this in terms of what should you be trying to accomplish with AI, there's two specific things. One is the impact, and for every different organization, that's going to be different. For us, we focus on things that will have impact at a human level. So can we save a life? Can we improve quality of life or quality of the human condition? If you are an investor, then I'm sure there's going to be a combination of commercial impact that you will want to see. along with social impact. And I think there's been a lot of really great perspectives on this. If you're a governmental institution, how do you think about the GDP impact that social efforts will bring you? But in addition, also add these additional efforts, such as, I mean, the UN has their Human Development Index. There's the Social Progress Index that has been put forward by Harvard professor Michael Porter. We have put forward an additional way of assessing impact, which is along prosperity, such as job security, along individual well-being, things like health and safety and housing, sustainability, so we don't just prioritize AI that can have a benefit for us in the short term, but we also think about the long-term consequences and the sustainability of that AI on our environmental system, on our economic sustainability, and fairness and trust, which is also important. So I think along this effort, the challenge, I would say, is not good or bad AI, but what is the impact that you are creating with the AI?
That's great. So where do you see it going from here? I'm curious to see from our entire panel speakers, what is your thought? Where is AI going from here in the next 1 to 5 years?
Me? I think AI, it's going to revolutionize how we are able to deal with what I call microeconomies in emerging markets. You know, for me, that's where I want to see AI go, because, you know, markets like Africa, you know, emerging economies where we've had a debt of infrastructure, a lack of infrastructure. So using technology and also using mobile infrastructure, which is where AI really lives, we can actually begin to have, you know, sustainable impacts on solutions for problems. The other thing where I see AI, it's basically around how we learn. Education from a very, very young perspective. AI is going to change the way the next generation interact with life as we know it. You know, because my daughter interacts completely differently with life because she understands a little bit about artificial intelligence. So, and a lot of the young people, especially in Africa, this is where I'm very focused on at the minute, is you see their relationship with AI, you know, is based around their mobile phones, because that is the real only infrastructure we have that works. So that is going to be the basis of knowledge, education, information, and interactivity, you know, for the continent as a whole. So, you know, when you look at it from either a social input perspective, either you're a donor, either you're an organization or government, if you don't understand the correlation and the relationship between the knowledge and the infrastructure and the way the community looks at the solution, then you'll be left out, because, you know, they will create other solutions that allow them to leapfrog, you know, what we call traditional means of communication to people. So I really think that, in my view as an entrepreneur working in the institute, that AI has a very positive approach to how we're able to connect emerging economies to the reality of where we want them to be in the current social impact of what we're talking about.
Indeed. Natasha?
Yeah, I just want to say I'm extremely optimistic the way we are going, because exactly because of this inversion, it seems that there is such affinity by the young generation to adopt it. Just talk to anybody who is playing games. They'll probably tell you, oh, that AI is really good. AI engine is very good, even though they probably know nothing about the algorithms that drive them. There is sort of this mindset that there's this magic in it, and they were going to take it to the future. So the fact that the young generation is involved. As a professor at the University of Nottingham, I teach computer scientists, and you have to see the buzz, and you have to feel this energy. It's amazing. And the final thing I want to say, AI is getting into, general digital technologies are getting into all other areas. So I know we were concerned about inclusion, particularly women inclusion. However, if you look at wherever women are, they will get access to digital technologies, whether they're in medicine, whether they're teaching, so we don't have to get them all into computer science, I just want to say. They will get access to digital technologies. And what I've seen in biochemistry, for example, it's amazing what AI can do for them. So generally, I'm extremely optimistic it's going to infiltrate all the generations and all the aspects. We just really need to be cognizant about side effects, possibly. Thank you.
Shamika, are you as optimistic as this?
No, I just, yeah.
Or is that more?
No, let me not give my perspective, but
Yes.
let me give you, because Natasha talked about the younger generations perspective. Let me give you the older generation perspective. We just finished a meeting with all science, technology, innovation ministers in Geneva. And this is the commission. They all came to the Commission on Science and Technology for Development, and they raised their concerns, because this is one of the issues that we discussed in the commission, was about this new and emerging frontier technologies, including AI. So this is what they said. Yes, we understand as consumers that these technologies bring amazing potential. This potential, whether it will be realized or not, nobody knows. But the big concern was the impact on employment. The ministers coming from developing countries were quite concerned that many jobs, the routine jobs, offshored, unskilled, semi-skilled jobs would vanish because of AI and automation and the machine learning and so forth. The second concern that they had was the potential to increase divides. The digital divide that we have today, because 50% of people still have no access to internet in the world, even though we talk about this big talk on AI. So if they do not have access to internet, does it mean that they will have no access to anything else, because they will be left behind in this new technological revolution? And the other big concern was the ethics. Bioethical concerns, privacy, safety, security challenges, and the algorithm bias. So there were a lot of concerns were raised, and you know, a lot of people didn't have answers. There was a lot of discussion, you know, what needs to be done. And one of the biggest concerns a lot of ministers had was that this whole discussion on frontier technologies and AI, you know, it's happening elsewhere. It's happening in the US, it's happening in China, it's happening in Europe. But the implications, the consequences of these technologies will be borne by poor people in developing countries. So their request was that they need to, the developing countries who are not developing these technologies, but at the receiving end of these technologies, need to be at the table when the technology is designed, when the governance structures are formed, and the ethics are formed. So this is the message from the older generation.
That's really interesting. There is indeed a divide. Ashley, how do you see that? Is there a divide, and how do you address that?
Well, I think there's a divide in terms of who will benefit. We did a report with ITU and found that AI in general will bring about $13 trillion US in terms of economic benefit over the next 10 years. However, the most economically advantageous countries, the most developed ones, will take 20 to 25% of that, and the lower ones will take less than half. So there is a divide that we have to address, and I think one of the ways that we can do that, and this is also referencing your last question, what do I think the future has for us? I would actually turn that into a challenge to this group, and I would say the future should have scale. It should have scale of what you're doing today. When we looked at use cases across AI for social good, and it was not exhaustive, we found over 160 brilliant ideas to help the SDGs that are going on right now, that are happening. So the question is not, do we come up with the next idea, can we come up with the next proof of concept, but for you startups out there, I would challenge you, you know, not just how do you bring your proof of concept, but how do you bring your proof of concept to help the next 5, 10, 15 million people? How do you, if you're a government or you're a foundation, how do you, you know, help turn on the lights, you know, to another 3 or 4 countries, not just proof of, you know, pilot something in one country? So I think that's a bit of the dialogue that we need to change to, which is not just what use case are we going to start up, but how do we create sustainable capabilities so we can scale.
Excellent point. Doreen, from an ITU perspective and in your new role, what is your view on the social, political, economic divide, and how do we take it to the best level in the future?
Thank you. So coming back to sort of the future, if I may, I would say I'm kind of cautiously optimistic. I think that there are great things that can happen, but if we don't close the connectivity divide, we will never be able to eliminate the existing inequalities. So we need to sort of get back to basics and remember that half the world's not connected, and we got to work harder on closing that divide. Our second big challenge that has an impact on the social, economic, and all aspects of AI is the data, and you referred to that well, John, in your intervention. We have a huge data problem in that those that can benefit most from AI applications are those that we don't have any data on, as you mentioned. And so those that we don't understand their needs, we don't understand their requirements, and so how can we have applications that will actually meet their needs? So that's a big problem. I don't know how many of you have read Claudia Perez's latest book on invisible women. Anybody? I see one person in the room. So Reinhard Scholl, the deputy head of our TSP and the ITU, directed me to that book, and I mentioned it because the author talks about the huge gender data gap, and what that means in our world are sort of strange things that women are being sort of weeded out in automated recruitment processes. So their CVs are sort of being weeded out. Speech recognition can recognize 70% of a male voice, but not a female voice. Pronouns are being, gender-neutral pronouns are actually being given a gender. So he is a doctor and she is a nurse. And so there's all sorts of things when it comes to the bias side and going back to the data side that we need to work harder on to make sure that that bias is not going to perpetuate the inequalities that exist in today's world.
That's where ethics is so important, and the work that everybody should do in that space. Before we turn to a few questions from the audience, I would like to ask you, Evans, what is your counterintuitive prediction for the next 5 years where AI is going?
Well, first of all, I would like to believe that there are two different categories of AI work that is being done at the moment. The first one is that there are a bunch of people that are beavering away in all parts of the world, including even in Africa, producing AI systems in domains, in different domains. So these are specialist AI systems that are operating or that will operate in specific domains. I believe work in this area is going to continue. I believe that most of the problems of the world, a lot of the problems of the world are solvable with a lot of this type of AI systems, and a lot of them are going to get solved within the next 5 years. But having said that, there are also a bunch of people that are also working on what we can call an artificial general intelligence system. These are systems that are going to mimic and probably even equal the level of intelligence that humans, have. In other words, these are AI systems that ultimately can become sentient. A lot of work also is being done. Someone like Ray Kurzweil says that within the last, the next 29 years, although he made this prediction some years ago, and he said 29 years, I don't know when that 29 years is going to, to be now. But basically he's saying that, when he made the prediction some few years ago that within the next 29 years, we are going to have AI systems that are sentient. So that, is the case. That's what I think also.
Yeah, so thank you very much. Any questions from the audience? Yes, sir, in the first row. Should I give you just my mic so you can...
very interesting panel. But there was one point that's integral to AI, to understanding AI. AI works on data, as the gentleman said. If you don't have the data, you don't have the AI, right? And who drives the data? The data is driven by young people who earn a living from creating technology that builds the data, yeah? So it's the governments of the world that have to create the incubators for the young people to develop the data to do it the right way. So I'd like to have one of your view on what the governments are doing to build these incubators for young people to earn a living building data that AI can work off, and that's what will decide whether it's being used for the good or the bad of a country. Thank you.
Who wants to take that? Natasha, please.
Yeah, I would like just to comment. We sort of agree that the AI term kind of covers almost everything. There is another term that's now competing, it's called data science, by the way. So there are two buzzwords, AI and data science. And data science in particular is driven by data, but AI, there are so many different techniques. Some of them depend on data, some of them not. So I would just say data is very important. Biases, as we heard, are very important. I also want to say that computer scientists, as a profession, they're very much aware of this. As a representative of Association of Computing Machinery, I can tell you that Association of Computing Machinery as an organization of professionals, both academics, scholars, and practitioners, we have ethical guidelines by which we put forward so that every person involved with AI and anything in computer science is obliged to follow these ethical guidelines. And some of them are really focused on quality. Do not do harm by putting technology that's going to harm other people. That's one of the big things. So my answer here to the question, yes, lack of data is a problem, but we are also developing techniques that can, what we call, have a cold start. What do you do if you don't have data? Do you create synthetic data? And so on. So there are a number of mechanisms by which you can deal with it, yeah.
I think the other thing is starting the dialogue with the people that have to have the end impact. So who are the entities that actually create the on-the-ground impact? And what I mean by that is, as an example, we worked with an anti-slavery NGO whose goal and part of their mission was to help survivors of human trafficking get restored back to care. And of course, you know, we thought they had actually quite great data when we started. They had over 10,000 survivor records. They had 250,000 caseworker notes, over 500,000 events. It seemed like it was great, but because of quality issues, lack of data accessibility, that got down and dwindled to about 2,500. And so, you know, when you start some of these techniques, you either can try them, but you can't really explain them, or you have to question yourself around if it's ethical to make a judgment based on that. And so I think, you know, what we came away from is, I would say, the counterintuitive. We didn't come away thinking, how heartbroken were we because we couldn't actually get, you know, do a sophisticated causal inference model and make a recommendation on that. We came away energized because that organization saw the potential. They saw the difference. Oh, wait, could we start to understand that if we had that better data quality? Yes, you can. And so it helped them start to bridge to that data quality that they were trying to, and now they have a plan, they have a 3-year plan to improve their data quality so that way they can do more of more sophisticated AI capabilities and help these survivors. So I think, you know, for a foundation out there, for an organization, the sooner you start and you start to understand, or you help somebody understand, you help them build the bridge to get that data quality they need in the future.
I think just to refer to your question from a practical perspective of what we're seeing is we work with about 300-400 hubs in Africa. There's a distinct difference between how AI is applied in Europe, America, and AI application in Africa. And like you said, what the young people who are the entrepreneurs, what they think about first is living. AI can help me build a solution that allows me to change my life first. and I'm collecting other people's data. So it's very important to understand that, and you really need to dive deep into the rural economies and emerging markets to get that. So what we try to do is meet a lot of these entrepreneurs in all these hubs and begin to, first of all, understand their psychological thinking, their thought process. Okay, why are you building this solution? What do you want this solution to do for you? Are you building a company that's going to do X? Because they're going to collect data anyway. And they're going to build data solutions that allow them to do a lot. And there's so many of them happening as we speak at the minute that we actually have no knowledge of. And some of them might be using it wrongly or rightly. We don't even know. But if you don't get them at that point and educate them, the governments really can't do much at the minute, because I'm telling you, we're working with a lot of startups in Africa, about 150 at the minute. They're disconnected from the governments. So waiting for the government to come up with a solution is not going to happen. They could probably sit in the boardroom and discuss the solution, and when they're ready, they'll come. But these guys, they move. They have a problem, they find a solution because they need money. So getting them in the places where they feel comfortable, in the hubs, before they develop the solutions, in the universities, and beginning to shape their minds. Say, you know what, you will do AI, I will support you, you will build a solution for fintech, agri-tech, whatever, but this is how you can make money, but also be able to have an ethical and social approach to AI that is inclusive. So that data you're having. So we did a program for 3 hubs where we got 40 young people between 21 and 27 who were building solutions. This is a real life example. And 60% of them were just collecting data because it would make them money. And some of them had 1, 2, 3 million users on their platform with data. I mean, nobody knows about that. So if you're talking at the high level, that's all great. But you need to dive deep into real everyday stuff that's happening to understand how these guys are interacting and see, can we change their mind first? Because they will do what they will do anyway because they need money.
Right. Thank you. One more question. The gentleman in the back. Do you have a mic? I'll just get to you quickly.
Thank you. I'm Pavan Dugal. I'm the head of the Artificial Intelligence Law Hub. We're looking at legal principles which have to evolve on regulation or enablement of artificial intelligence at a global level. My question to the diverse panel. Since morning, in a couple of panels, I've heard about regulation. Now, what is the vision of this panel? There are countries like China who already have passed a new law on artificial intelligence, though they have not implemented it. We are all talking about ethical standards, but the bigger issue is how do we actually enforce the ethics? Because the ethical standards in the West may be different in terms of slight perspectives than the Far East or otherwise. So your thoughts of the panel as a whole, how should we deal with this very complex problem? Should we do for more self-regulation, more voluntary code of conducts, or should we allow the governments of the world to start coming in and start regulating AI, thereby even killing the potential chances of its further enablement? My question.
Shamika, yes.
Thank you. I probably sound like a very old and boring and traditional person, but when it comes to regulation, yes, you cannot simply ignore governments. The problem we have is, in many times we see that the technology is moving very fast and regulators are not moving that fast because regulators are not technology experts. So you always constantly see this gap. So since we are in a revolutionary moment with regard to technology, and we need to think how do we need to regulate these technologies, not to kill innovation, but to address the downside that these technologies could bring. So for example, for the United Nations Commission on Science and Technology for Development that I mentioned, we looked at AI ethics. So we saw there were 30 different principles and guidelines in AI, guidelines and ethics. And done by governments sometimes, the NGOs, mostly done by companies, tech giants. And when we look at really carefully what they say, they are sometimes contradicting each other. The priorities are different. they're not consistent. So when it comes to that, I think, Evans, you mentioned, I think you need to have a much larger dialogue. I guess the United Nations was created for that dialogue. But the thing is, the governments and the private sector and the civil society, the multi-stakeholder groups need to agree to get to the United Nations and start working on ethics of this technology. It's not just AI, it's a gene editing. It's another technology that can do amazing things for us and also can do harm. So I know it is boring for young people. Yeah, let's go to the UN, it takes a long time, negotiation. But I think at this moment in our time, I think we need to start thinking very seriously to put to the United Nations that you all created to work. Thank you.
Indeed. Natasha, yeah?
Yeah, I'd just like to take on this economic aspect as well. Normally what happens in the early stage of innovation, and with the AI, we're coming to the application areas now, there's a chaos at the beginning, but there is a mechanism that normally exists, and it's called standardization. Once somebody really wants something to be deployed everywhere internationally, driven by business or by the governments, normally what happens is people need to sit around the table and think. So in this instance, maybe what should be the precision of face recognition, or what should be precision of optimizing the transport. So in a way, it will come. Maybe we are a little bit impatient at the moment, but I think it will come just because applications and practices are starting to evolve. So I'm hopeful that we are going to soon come to standardization and address some of these key issues.
Indeed. And Doreen, a closing word?
Thank you. I would say privacy, data protection, ethics, security are all critical issues. I don't think that heavy-handed regulation would be the answer. I think that would stifle innovation and progress. But we do need to be careful, and I agree with what you're saying. And I think it's important to have multi-stakeholder dialogues, dialogues as we're having here and within the UN family and beyond. I think governments have a role, but so does the private sector, civil society, and academia.
Indeed. John, one more.
One last comment. I mean, I would basically, what we try to say to the young people that we talk to is 4 things. 1, education. We educate them on the reason why they should use AI for good, and when they're building products, privacy, all those things. 2, incentives. We incentive for doing good. 3, then self-regulation coming from education incentive, then dialogue with governments. So if also the governments can look at those 4 pillars and be able to understand, provide education, provide incentive, get them to self-regulate, then let us sit together and dialogue, which is the final, then we might actually get to somewhere where we understand or figure out how we would regulate this space.
Definitely. What is exciting indeed is having multidisciplinary conversations. What we do here in a very diverse setting. What I'm most excited is that we can ask a lot of new questions, and this technology will allow us to ask new questions and find unexpected answers. Thank you so much to this panel, to this very diverse panel, and to the audience, and we are looking forward to do together. It's time to get out there and do and implement what we've been learning, and that's a very, very important aspect. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you very much to everybody on that panel. That was brilliant. And after all that thinking, let's have a short coffee break and check out the demo stage, after which we will have people competing for your attention, and you'll also have 1 or 2 fantastic keynotes to enjoy. Thank you. See you shortly.